we're gonna slap at the bass. Hello, welcome to Jason the Old Millennial. My name is Jason, speaking to you here in my basement in the great state of Kansas. And I hope everybody's doing well here on it's a late night on a Friday night and here in Kansas, and it is freezing cold outside. Next couple of days it's going to be negative degrees. It's going to be like negative 10, and then Sunday it's going to be negative 15. It's like I can't go outside, it's too cold. Which is maybe good for this video, as we're going to talk about Canadian band. Canada known for being extremely cold too. Feels a little like Canada here in Kansas a little bit. But yeah, in this video, I am going to do another deep dive into another band. This time the band is going to be the band Rush. A huge band, has a pretty big following. In fact, three of my friends are pretty huge Rush fans that I talk to all the time. Scott from SoundLab Studios, Nick from Townsend 909, and Brian from Brian's Music Showcase, always talking about Rush and the greatness of Rush. And Rush is one of those bands I kind of just knew a little bit about growing up, not a lot. In fact, my biggest knowledge of Rush is the movie I Love You Man with Paul Rudd and Jason Segel. In that movie, they're big Rush fans, and they talk about Rush, and that's where you get one of my favorite lines, Paul Rudd playing the bass. Paul Rudd, who went to Kansas University, by the way, he's playing the bass and he's saying slap at the bass. And I think about Rush, I think about slapping the bass on there from Paul Rudd. And yeah, and at that point I didn't know there was a huge Rush following until I watched that movie, and I was like, this movie's about two guys who are big, part of they're big Rush fans. They go to a Rush concert at one point, and I remember seeing that, and I had no idea what Rush looked like. I really knew a lot about them. I remember seeing that and going, oh, that's what Rush looks like. Definitely, you look at Geddy Lee. Geddy Lee has those glasses, usually the long black hair. He has kind of a unique look to him. So I remember going, oh, okay, that's Rush. Like, I didn't know that much about Rush. Like, I heard the name, didn't know what they looked like, didn't know a lot of their music, just some of their big hits. And so I feel like I kind of got introduced a little bit to Rush through Love You Man, but never was a big, follower. Didn't listen to him growing up. My, family didn't listen to them. Didn't know anything about their albums, really. I knew some of their big songs. Like, if he asked me about Rush or anything, I would say, yeah, Spirit of the Radio, Tom Sawyer, Limelight. Those are like the three ones that I could probably name on top of my head. Besides that, didn't know any other really big Rush songs. So the fact that Rush was like this big band that people loved was kind of almost surprise to me when I found out, like, oh, there's a big following for this band I didn't know that much about. I feel like, especially in the last couple of years since I got into the vinyl community, I've met more and more people that are like hardcore Rush fans and consider them to be one of the greatest bands of all time. So, and like I said, especially with my three close friends in the vinyl community, like I said, I definitely hear a lot about the greatness of Rush. So Rush is definitely a band I've been interested in and wanted to delve into more at some point. The reason why I'm delving into them right now, actually, is because of Scott from SoundLab Studios, because I did a little contest between my close friends, and they got to build their own band. And they kind of took turns building their own band, basically. And then I put them in a poll, and the winner got to pick my next deep dive. So Scott, his band that he put together, won the contest. So his reward was to name the next band that I'm going to do, or artist I'm going to do a deep dive on. Of course, I knew he was going to pick Rush. I knew Rush is a band that he's been wanting me to get into, and so, which is great because it's a band I wanted to get into anyway. So it kind of worked out pretty good. So I was kind of ready for it. So yeah, so I got to listen to all their albums and then do some research. And so I'm going to kind of go through a little bit of their history and talk a little about my thoughts on their music itself and some of my favorite of their music that I've gotten into. So yeah, let's start with Rush. They were formed actually in 1968 in Toronto, Canada. They're kind of a couple of, I want to say high school or, teenage friends kind of forming a band together, it seems like. Because original lineup, it's always been a trio, basically. But the very first original Rush, which is going to be one of the most surprising things I found out about Rush is missing two key members in a three-member band, which is more than half your band. But the original band was Alex Lifeson as the guitar player, a guy named John Rutsey as the drummer, and Jeff Jones as the bass player. That's the original Rush lineup. They were three friends, basically, or two of them. Well, Lifeson and Rutsey, I guess, were childhood friends, and they wanted to put a band together. They needed a bass player. They got the drummer, the guitar player, basically. And I don't know who sang lead at that point, but needed a bass player, so they found a guy named Jeff Jones who was playing in another band, got him to join their band, and that was the trio. Then Rutsey, the drummer's brother, came up with the idea for Rush being the name of their band, which I'm not sure where he came with that idea, but it's a cool name. I think he probably just said, hey, this is a cool name, Rush, It definitely worked. So that was Rush. They formed this trio back in the late 60s, actually, which is interesting. That's kind of quite far back, but of course they didn't get into prominence till a little bit later here that we'll get into. Well, Jones and them played together, but they didn't play very long together. Jones eventually found it hard getting to License House. They would do all their rehearsals and everything and practice whatever at Alex License House, but I guess it was a long enough drive for Jones that he couldn't really make it anymore, and so he kind of had to just bow out of the band because of, I guess, logistics, interesting enough. And so Jones had a friend that he suggested, hey, I got a friend who also plays, or a guy I go to school with, who also plays the bass, and he could be good for the band. And that guy name was Gary Weinrib, if I'm pronouncing that right. Gary would then change his name to Geddy Lee. So his original name was Gary Weinrib. Geddy Lee's a pretty cool name, so it's probably a good idea they changed it there. But yeah, that's where we get Geddy Lee. Geddy Lee, it seems like one of those chance things that one guy bowed out, but he had a friend, and it happened to be a really good member of the band. I mean, Geddy Lee, obviously, you couldn't have Rush without Geddy Lee. I mean, his vocals are so unique. I never heard anybody really sing like Geddy Lee, and he provides, definitely, important part of the band. The vocals definitely make them stand out. Also, he's a really good bass player and also keyboard player. So it's weird to think, gosh, there's Rush started out without Geddy Lee. You just assume Geddy Lee would be like the original member, but anyway, so Geddy Lee joins in. So now we got Geddy Lee, Alex Lifeson, and John Rutsey is our trio at this point. Obviously, there's still a big member we're missing at this point that we'll get onto a little bit later. So there's somebody named Lindy Young joined the group, and they got a new manager, Ray Daniels. It's Lindy Young. I'm not sure what he played. I guess I didn't delve into that much, but I guess they had a fourth member there for a little bit. Maybe he played the guitar or something as well. But when they got the manager, Ray Daniels, he didn't really like Geddy Lee. I guess they didn't really get along at first, and he didn't think Geddy Lee's style worked in the band, evidently, and actually kicked Geddy Lee out of the band, which I said very early on, of course, before they became big. Excuse me. But it's crazy to think that you're going to kick out one of your biggest members, an important member, of course, hindsight, of course, going on to be a huge member of this big, rock band, one of the big rock bands of the time period. And yeah, kicked out Geddy Lee out of the band. And he also changed the name of the band from Rush to Hadrian. I don't know why. That's interesting why. I don't know what's the deal with Ray Daniels, but definitely didn't make the best decisions, it seems like, at this point. He also replaced Geddy Lee with a bass player named Joe Perna. So we have a very, very short period here where Rush doesn't have Geddy Lee in it. Actually, probably just for one gig, because according to my research, they played one gig without Geddy Lee and with the new name, and the gig went terrible. And so they kind of realized, let's bring Geddy Lee back in. We're doing terrible at this. So they replaced Joe Perna back with Geddy Lee coming back in, and they changed their name back to Rush. So it was kind of a weird blip in their history, which I thought was actually pretty interesting. So now we get into 1972. Like I said, they kind of stuck with the trio of these three, and Daniels and another guy named Vic Wilson were their managers. And at this point, they were mostly just playing at bars and clubs around, I guess, Toronto or whatever. They're in Canada and doing, pretty well. Obviously, they're very talented, and they're building up somewhat of a local following and doing well in that way. Of course, they want to make, they want to get a record deal, and they weren't getting a record deal at the moment. So it says they formed their own label, which I don't know how you do that, but it says they formed their own label called Moon Records, which means, I guess, it's just a very low budget independent, record, and you really want the big money. You want to get a big record company, paying you for making records. But they had to get their start somewhere, I guess, and this was the best way to do it, just come up with their own record label. So in 1973, they put out a single called Not Fade Away / You Can't Fight It, which charted number 88 in Canada. So charted in top 100, I guess. Not huge, but and it's not a huge song that I know from them, but I guess it maybe gave them some potential, that they had some potential to be good in the future. So they produced their own album, their very first album called Rush, self-titled album, and it came out in 1974. So we're talking about, they started in 1968, and so 6 years later, they come out with their first album that they produced themselves. It didn't chart extremely well. It went number 86 in Canada and didn't reach out to really internationally, I don't think. And in saying that, listen to the very first album. It's definitely one of the weakest albums, I think. It's weird kind of getting, and I remember when I was first starting to listen to Rush, Scott kind of warned me that that first album doesn't really sound like what Rush would become, that they were trying to, what he described it was that they were trying to do an impression of Led Zeppelin. So they're trying to do a little bit of a Led Zeppelin type style, and not really their style that they would, come up with after this, I guess you can say. Yeah, no, it just feels weird. The album felt kind of, listening to it, just didn't feel like Rush, what I would think Rush would be. And I guess that's because they weren't finding their voice yet, which happens a lot with bands. I feel like it takes maybe a little bit to find like their unique voice. Most all these other rock bands are out there. And so at first you kind of, try to implement the bands that you like Led Zeppelin, let's say. But yeah, it's a weird album. Not a lot of big hits. The best song, and the song that kind of got most notoriety at this point, was a song called Working Man. And it got on a little bit of a following amongst the blue-collar workers in Canada, because it's talking about them, the working man. So because of that, it kind of become popular, to play in the bars and stuff like that. So that helped them a lot to further them to get a better record deal. Yeah, so I'd say if you listen to the first album, yeah, I'd almost say skip it, because it's just nothing real significant about that first album. And of course, maybe part of it is they're missing a very important member of the band, which is going to come up here real soon. So definitely things change here by the time you get the second album. But like I said, thanks to Working Man becoming somewhat of a local popularity, they did get signed on with Mercury Records. And at this point, we have some creative differences in the band. I think Geddy Lee and Lifeson wanted to do prog rock, which was kind of like a bigger thing at this point in the 70s. It's kind of, I want to say, I don't know when prog rock started, but it felt like in the 70s that started to be a bigger deal, trying to do this prog rock. And prog rock I'm fairly new to. I didn't grow up listening to prog rock. I never heard of prog rock until it seems like recently, like I said. But my sense of prog rock, and I'm not the biggest fan, to be honest. I don't like a lot of prog rock, but it seems prog rock, if you don't know prog rock, it stands for progressive rock, of course. And people that are prog rock, their songs, they come up with, it's not, I almost want to say it's the opposite of commercial sounding that you hear on the radio. They're not really big radio hits on prog rock albums. Songs are going really long. Like a radio song, you want to be 3 to 4 minutes long. Well, prog rock, they want to do 10-minute, 15-minute songs, just way, way too long. They love doing these very long, strung out songs. Lots of instrumentals in there, lots of periods where there's no singing, just the instruments rocking it out, and lots of key changes and melody changes in the song. And like I said, they love doing these long songs. A lot of times they love doing songs that tell stories, some kind of epic story within the song. Anyway, so definitely very different from what I'm used to listening more of the, commercial sounding pop and rock albums. So this definitely was different for me getting into Rush at this period. But yeah, so they want to do more prog rock, while the drummer Rutsey wanted to do more, just hard rock like Led Zeppelin, I guess, style. And so there were some creative differences. There's some arguing there. Also, Rutsey was having some health problems as well. And I want to say Scott told me that I think maybe he was having drug issues, like he was a drug addict and stuff like that, and that they want him to quit the band to, because he needed help, he needed to go rehab, something like that. But I'm reading all kinds of different things. But either way, the drummer quits the band, Rutsey. So now they have to audition a new drummer. And in comes who we know is their drummer, Neil Peart. And Neil Peart, and this is really shocking to go, wow, they made an album without Neil Peart. How do you make an album without one of the, huge members of the band? And of course, this Neil Peart wins the audition, gets to be the new drummer. And this is what we know as Rush, really, at this point. Neil Peart on drums, Alex Lifeson on guitar, and Geddy Lee on bass, and keyboard and lead vocals, basically. This is the classic trio that they're going to get for the rest of their career, and what they're known for. And yeah, Neil Peart definitely brought a lot in. I think albums get much better after that first album. And I have to wonder if it's because Neil Peart comes in and his drumming is just absolutely phenomenal. He's one of the greatest drummers, which is crazy that how long could they have gone without one of the greatest drummers, and been successful? So it seems like one of those things where fate just happened just right, where this member left and then you get Geddy Lee, this member leaves and you get Neil Peart. It's like, wow. I mean, that's incredible that happen just to come across one of the great, drummers of all time. And yeah, his drumming just really elevates the band, I think. I think you really noticed it after this. The drumming is just so good and pretty prominent. Also, Neil Peart is a really good songwriter, evidently, and is the main songwriter of the band, which, again, I thought was pretty interesting. You don't hear so many drummers being the main songwriter. It's usually the lead singer, the lead guitar player, something like that. So Peart provides a lot, drumming and songwriting. And at this point, they wanted to be more of a prog rock band, and so that's the direction they went with their next several albums in this kind of mid-70s period, I guess early mid-70s. Their second album is called Fly By Night. Interestingly, didn't do particularly that well, and I think it's a really good album. In fact, this is my favorite. This is my hot take. This is my favorite Rush album, Fly By Night. Only their second album. It's my favorite album there. I think it's just an excellent rock album. It's not as prog rock as I think the next couple albums. Has a really cool song called Rivendell, which is a place in the story Lord of the Rings, which is a Lord of the Rings fan. That's cool that they have a song called Rivendell. But it's a really beautiful song. Like, it's not a hard rock song like most of their stuff, but it's a little different and it's just wonderful. Like, I was really surprised when I heard it and going, wow, this is amazing. I love this song. And Fly By Night, the title song, is really good. And overall, it's a really good album. I think it's very underrated. I think one of their best, in my opinion. But like I said, didn't do as well as they would like. Also, their third album, Crest of Steel, again, very prog rock. Not an album I care for. It's actually one of my least favorite Rush, but I think a lot of Rush fans like that album. But again, not very good. So here, 3 albums in, haven't had a lot of success so far. Even though Fly By Night was a radio hit, I think. But not a lot of radio hits there. They're not successfully charting. So they're getting a lot of pressure from the record label. Record label is saying, hey, how about you go away from prog rock and how about you write some more commercial, radio-friendly songs, Write some shorter songs that we can put on the radio. We can't put a 15-minute song on the radio. The radio, stations won't do that. So how about you write something that we can get out there and get, sell some more records. We need to sell more records. So that was the pressure they were getting, of course. So they had a choice. Do we go with the record label, try to produce something a little more commercial sounding, shorter songs, more catchier melodies or whatever? Or do we go and try to continue our prog rock ways, which is where we want the band to go? So what did they do? Well, they picked the latter. They go and make one of the more prog rock albums in their fourth album they ever made, an album called 2112 in 1976. And if you know them, 2112 is one of their most, definitely a very important album in their discography, and one of the favorite albums of any Rush fan, I think. It's one I've heard people talk about, that's a pretty big album for them. So yeah, they go the opposite direction of the record company. Make 2112. The very opening track is 20 minutes long. 20 minutes. I've never heard a 20-minute song before. So it's crazy when you get to 2112 and you're listening to side A is just one song, one 20-minute song. It's this very epic storytelling song, going through different things. It changes a lot. Very interesting song. I mean, obviously musicianship is very good. A lot of good stuff to the song. I would say I'm not a big fan of it just because it's so long, and I'm not used to these long songs like this. So, but it's not terrible either. It's got some good stuff there, but it's not my favorite. But I will say the second side is really good. Like, I think 2112 overall is a good album. Obviously, like I said, it's one of the favorites of most Rush fans. Even me, and not a big prog rock guy, I still really like this album. Second side, every song is just really, really great. To me, I skipped that first side. Listen to the second side, it's a great second side. Anyways, but overall, the gamble worked. I mean, it was a gamble. If this album did not do well, there's a good chance we wouldn't get Rush anymore, or at least with the record company. They might have cut ties with them at this point and said, hey, we told you to do a commercial radio-friendly album. You went against us, did a prog rock album. It didn't do well. Whatever. That could have been the end of the Rush as a band. Who knows? They could have broken up. You never know. But the gamble worked. The album actually did pretty well, and it charted top 5 in Canada. So it was successful enough that it kept them going and doing more prog rock albums, which is what they wanted. So it worked out very well for them. The next album, Farewell to the Kings, in 1977, wasn't that successful, but it had a single called Close to the Heart, which is a really good song. It was a hit song for them at least, and was a top 40 song in the UK. Their sixth album, Hemispheres, maybe another huge prog rock. It's weird because I don't like the really long ones necessarily, and if I remember right, Farewell to the Kings has this very long song, and I didn't like it that much. And then you get to Hemispheres, and Hemispheres I think only has maybe 4 songs on it, 4 or 5 songs, because all the songs are so long, they only could fit 4 songs on the album or something crazy like that. And there's a song that's named the same as the song from Farewell to Kings. It's part 2, the same song or something. It's very weird, very interesting thing to do. But anyways, I'm not a big fan, if you can tell. I'm not a big fan of those 2 albums. Again, I'm not a big prog rock guy, so they're not my favorites. But I think most prog rock or most Rush fans like these albums. So then we get a little bit of a change here with their 7th album, and we're getting to 1980, so we're changing to a new decade. And at this point, they decided to go a little bit away from the prog rock and do some more radio-friendly type music. And so in the 7th album, we get an album called Permanent Waves in 1980. It introduces some reggae and some new wave sound to the album. And I think it was a good choice, because I think this is definitely their best. I say definitely. I mean, as far as hit songs, chart-wise, this is their most successful period in the 80s. I would say the 80s, they definitely are more successful as a band, I say, than their prog rock 70s in a way. And it really starts with this album, Permanent Waves, which is a really good album, one of my favorite Rush albums. And I think a lot of people really like this album, Rush fans and all. Like I said, the songs are shorter, they're more fit the radio better, and it comes out with their biggest hit song at this point, Spirit of the Radio. Like I said, if you know anything about Rush, Spirit of the Radio's got to be one of the big songs that you know about, and one of the best songs they ever did. The guitar playing is just absolutely phenomenal. The really fast pace, instrumentally just amazing. Really fun, catchy song. Like I said, a huge hit, number 13 in the UK. Really put them, I said maybe they're a little bit on the map, but this really put them on the map, like I said. And then their 8th album is the biggest album they ever did, Moving Pictures, in 1981, the very next year. And if you talk to most Rush fans, it's probably their number 1 favorite album. It's my 2nd favorite Rush album, in fact, to tell you the truth. It's the first Rush album I ever heard. And we did a review on Sound Lab Studios, in fact. But yeah, really good album, has some of their biggest hits on it. Yeah, definitely the most popular album they ever did. But yeah, 2 big hits are Tom Sawyer and Limelight. 2 songs, like I said, I heard on the radio a lot growing up. So yeah, just unique, the style, Geddy's voice, with the keyboards, and they're doing more synthesizer stuff here at this point. But yeah, just absolutely amazing songs. And this album went #1 in Canada. The first album to go #1. It also was #3 in the US and UK. So I mean, top 3 in those 2 countries plus #1 in Canada. So yeah, very, very good. The next album, like I said, this is their biggest period. I say Permanent Waves to Signals is kind of those 3 albums kind of was their most successful albums of their career. So the 9th album is called Signals, 1982. Again, we're using more synthesizer here, which actually works. I think Geddy Lee's very good on this, kind of using the keyboard and synthesizer stuff. They're also throwing in reggae, some funk, some ska. They're definitely throwing some more stuff in there, which makes it more interesting. They have 2 big singles here, New World Man and Subdivisions. Subdivisions is one of my favorite Rush songs. It's a really, really good song that I've heard on the radio before, but definitely top tier Rush stuff. Again, this album went #1 in Canada, so it's the 2nd album in a row to hit #1. So like I said, doing very well at this point. Also top 10 UK, US. So definitely these 3 straight albums, those are the big albums, I think, for Rush. And then they do a couple albums after that, all do decently well. I think Grace Under Pressure, Power Windows, they're okay albums. They're not some of my favorite. They're not the worst. I know my friend Scott loves those albums. In my opinion, the last really good album was Hold Your Fire from 1987. It's actually one of my favorite Rush albums, and another very underrated album. I don't think people talk about that enough, but there's a song called Time Stands Still. It's a really great song. I love that song. Sorry. But yeah, really good album. I'd say that 80 to 87 period, really good period for Rush. I really like what they're doing there. Again, they're going away from prog rock, so that's why I like it more. I think if you like prog rock, you might like the 70s period more. But that's me. I feel like after 87, I don't know, they just kind of lost something. They don't make another good album, in my opinion. They have another 5 or 6 albums. And when I listened to the discography, like, it was somewhat disappointing. After I get from Hold Your Fire in 87 on to the end, it's just one boring album after another. I don't know why. It just felt like their style changed a little bit. They're still good musicians. I mean, the guitar is still very well. You know, the drums is doing really well. But it just felt like generic rock to me, of 80s and 90s generic rock. And just didn't sound like Rush anymore. It didn't sound unique to them anymore. I don't know. I don't know what it is, but they lost something after 87. And I never thought they gathered that magic back. So it was really hard listening to it. And after 87 going, oh man, all these albums are not very good. And so it leaves you at the end going, not with a good taste in your mouth for Rush. So it's like, I almost would say, listen to their, I mean, I like the second album, but like, I'd say listen to the second album to 87, like that 70, I don't know, 74, 75 to 87. Listen to that period and then quit, I would say. I don't think it's just not going to leave a good, memory for you, unfortunately. So I hate that I had to get through all those bad albums at the end, which happens sometimes with bands that they go, I think, past their prime in this sense. But yeah, other albums I don't really want to mention. There's nothing really that great there. And so, yeah, their last album came out in 2012 called Clockwork Angels. Again, I thought not a very good album, but the very next year, 2013, Rush would be inducted into the Hall of Fame. Obviously very deserving. Again, coming from someone who's new to Rush, like, I'm not a huge Rush fan, but I understand why they're so big and why people love them so much. I mean, you're talking about one of the great, conversation of one of the great drummers, Neil Peart. Axl Lifeson, I think, is in the conversation with one of the great guitar players. Geddy Lee in conversation with one of the probably best bass players. I mean, so you're talking about some of the best musicians, I think, ever to play together in rock music. And like I said, they have some really good albums, lots of good songs in there, unique sound to them that makes them stand out. So I'm a fan. I'm not like as huge as some other people, but I am a fan. I think they are a really, really good band. And I was glad I got to go through all their stuff. And now I understand Rush a little bit better and get why people like them so much. Unfortunately, they stopped touring in 2016. Neil Peart was having some health problems, and Lifeson was, I think, having some, some problems with his fingers, playing the guitar. So they kind of stopped touring at that point. And Then in 2020, Neil Peart passed away from brain cancer. So unfortunately, losing Neil Peart, that was the end of the band. They basically announced that was the end because they can't play anymore without Neil Peart, too important member of the band, and getting old enough that at that point they weren't playing together anyways. But I suppose there's always a chance for a reunion. But at that point, no reunion. So 2020, that was the end. So overall, 19 albums from 74 to 2012. But yeah, really great. I really recommend anybody who hasn't listened to Rush to try them out. Like I said, if it was me and I was recommending Rush to anybody, I would say start with Fly By Night, their second album. I think it's a really good album. I think you have to listen to 2112. I think it's one of their biggest albums and very prog rock. Even though I'm not a prog rock guy, I think it's still a pretty good album to listen to. Permanent Rays, because it really changes to their more commercial sounding stuff, and you got Spare the Radio on there. It's a very good album. And then you have to listen to Moving Pictures, of course. That's their biggest album. So gotta listen to that. And then I would personally say listen to Hold Your Fire. Really underrated album and last really good album. So to me, if I can recommend anything, I would recommend those 5 albums to anybody who's not big, who doesn't know Rush very well. Or you can be like me and listen to everything, and then you know the good and the bad. But to me, that was their top stuff. But yeah, I'm very happy to get through this. I hope this was well done. I hope my friends enjoyed listening to me kind of talk about what they already know. And if you don't know much Rush, I hope you learned something about them. And yeah, definitely recommend them as one of the great 70s, 80s rock bands. So, but yeah, thank you for watching this video. Thank you for liking it. Thank you to all my subscribers for supporting the channel. I appreciate all of you, and I hope you have a good day.